Abu Dhabi 21 remains unresolved. It was, by most standards, one of the biggest scandals in sporting history, let alone Formula One history. And in the end, it was a cop-out. Well, we'll fire this guy, we'll change this, and we'll try not to let it happen again. I mean, that is a complete and utter cop-out. But the art is in the moment that he chooses to do that rotation, which is, for want of a better word, the moment of least possible downside. Because there's always a downside in a corner. It's the moment you got to turn the wheel, if you like. And Max has, and it's different every corner, every lap. Everything's changing. The tires, the brakes, the fuel level, the oil, the surface of the road, the ambient, everything's changing. Where you've hit the brakes, how you come out of the brakes, nothing is the same. And it's this feel for the exact precise moment to do it, which is not something he's thinking about. It's just pure instinct that makes him very special as an athlete, let alone as a racing driver. And I think we're seeing a Lewis at the moment who's got his deal for next year. He's looking forward to his Ferrari career. He's getting paid a fortune. He's not going to try and go out on a limb now unless the car feels reasonably well balanced. Why do the teams have pit boards? Because the electronics aren't fail-safe. Something might go wrong. And if things go wrong on the grid with the sensors, use your eyes. It's not that difficult. Why haven't they got judges on every line? But in terms of running a company, team principal of a Formula One team, making it all happen, keeping the balls in the air, yeah, there are others around that do that very well. Christian's not the only one, and he'd be the first to admit that. But he does have that talent of keeping Adrian under control. And this will be the big test now, won't it? See whether the Christian Horner, Adrian Newey partnership, which you could argue is the most successful partnership in the history of Grand Prix racing, whether or not they can now get through this period as well. That'll be an interesting test.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me as always, the goatiest F1 mind in the business. I will say that once again for the avoidance of doubt. My friend, your friend, Mr. Peter Windsor. How are we doing, sir?
I'm great, Cameron, thank you. Yeah, in the sun here in Spain, spring has arrived, blue sky, no wind, just lovely. Dogs out sleeping on the grass there. Dog, Dexter, give him a name.
Let's go. You want to start including him in the stream, Peter?
Well, yeah, he's quite into golf, I've got to say. Likes swimming. Haven't yet managed to convince him that motor racing is the way to go, but we'll get there.
It is only a matter of time. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. Let's talk some F1. I'm going to get your opinion first on the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. For you, with your journalist cap on, what was the biggest story to come out the back of the Saudi Arabian GP this weekend past?
The biggest story. Wow, there's a superlative there. I can think of some big stories. The biggest story, I suspect it's Ferrari really have shown that they've managed to put a gap between themselves and the scrabbling bunch behind them, in no particular order: McLaren, Aston Martin, and factory Mercedes. And that's quite something, isn't it? Because there was maybe about a year ago, we were saying, the Aston Martin or this or that. But the Ferrari team have done a very good job over the winter, I think. And Charles drove really well. Ollie Bearmann was brilliant, of course. And Charles was brilliant too. Let's not detract from Charles. So really good performance from both drivers, and particularly stepping in for Carlos. A lot of credit should go to Jock Clear, who runs the Ferrari Academy now. And he's at races. He's in Charles' part of the garage, working closely with Charles. But he also does a lot of stuff with the Academy. And he should take a lot of credit for the way Oliver went in that car. So to me, that's the biggest, but it's a bit fatuous to say all of that under the heading of yet another unbelievable 1-2 result for Red Bull, with Sergio Perez driving really well and back up to Max, even with a 5-second penalty. It just shows how good these guys are.
So let me talk to the Max Verstappen paradox for a second, Peter. There's a couple of things in there that I want to pass out. I was particularly impressed, much to the abhorrence of the community, on the Max Verstappen pole lap. And again, I watched the onboard of it that Sky kept showing us, or showed us on YouTube at least. And I want you to speak. I was watching it, Peter, and I could just hear your...
but why to the abhorrence of a lot of people? How could anybody be show abhorrence about that pole lap?
So I think the question in the community was how good was that pole lap? The question being, well, Checo was only 3/10 down the road, and was that the car or was that Max Verstappen?
3/10 is a massive amount on a circuit like that.
Yeah,
Massive
90-second. Exactly, Peter. This is my point. And when I think I've always been an eye test guy, and when I'm watching that and I can see Max's wheel encroach upon the barrier, that tells me that this dude he's not leaving any tenths on the table, and I think that's remarkable.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and of course, it's one thing for a reflexy, reactive driver not to leave any tenths on the table, but then hit the wall or make a mistake and then have to back away and basically drive under what is then potentially the limit. It's quite another when a driver like Max, who's not a reactive, reflexy driver, he's a manipulative driver, getting the car to do what he wants to do in a very gentle, supple way. And when a driver like that is not leaving any tenths, what he's doing is maximizing the friction circle in effect, which means that you want to run as close as possible to the circumference of this mathematical circle in order to maximize the performance of the tires. And that means trading off, braking against steering load, brakes coming out of the brakes as you're increasing the steering load, creating little flat areas where you can get the car stopped most efficiently, even in the middle of a change of direction if you have to do that. And that's what Max is so good at doing. Everything is fingertippy. Everything is very, very supple. And there are no sharp edges to anything that Max Verstappen does. So when people say, well, did he leave it all on the table there? Because we're not seeing on opposite lock flicking up a bit of debris as he's leaving a corner. They're missing the point. They're missing the point of what he's done to get to the exit. And it's all about footwork and handwork. And that's what you see with Max. Well, you don't see it, actually. TV doesn't capture it very well. You can get the odd angle shot where you can see Max is creating these little areas into turn 22. There was Anthony Davidson did a pretty good analysis of that, I think. And that was exactly how Max was driving throughout the lap. And it's very similar in a way to turn 1 to turn 2 in Montreal, when you're coming out of that left-hander and then you've got to get hard on the brakes for the right-hand hairpin. And the car's got load on it. But you'll find a Max, not only Max, but specifically Max in this conversation, will be creating just with the steering, he'll just be creating a little area where he can just get the car right, where he's going to hit the brakes. And that's what it's all about. It's feeling those areas and those moments.
No, I love that. It's really, I think it's fascinating for once to kind of see Max's skill, that like just the differences between him as versus a Charles Leclerc, right? Charles Leclerc asking much more of the car in the braking zone.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to Charles, I thought he was superb into whatever that corner is, the long left-hander, the bank one. He was really good through the first chicane. I saw Charles driving right there, but I don't think the Ferrari has anything like the same grip level for the downforce that they need to run in order to be competitive on the straight, if you see what I mean. And he was having to work harder, a little bit like Lewis sometimes has to use longer corners to get the tires to work, so he's got that sweet spot. It's difficult to compare lap for lap, Max in a Red Bull, Charles in a Ferrari, Lewis in a Mercedes, because they're all having to do different things to get the car to work. I think the only one who's got a car that's basically reacting to whatever he wants to do is Max. And everybody else is having to compromise a little bit. And I would still stand up, proudly, not proudly, correct. I would still stand upright and say that I think Charles is right there with Max in terms of his ability. And I think Lewis is too. And I don't think Oscar Piastri is that far away.
They're all thereabouts. Those are the top guys I think you just mentioned. They're finally on Max, Peter. And again, something that you've said in previous convos that we've had is that Max gains most of his time by getting on the short corners, tight lines, whatever, and then gets on the throttle 90% of the time materially quicker than the rest of them by virtue of these tight lines that he's taking. And again,
well, yeah, kind of. I mean, when he's applying the power, he's doing so in a way that the car can take it. He's not doing it with load on the car, trying to find the moment when he can sort of get the back end to work, even if he's got a bit of correction. He's very patient mid-corner when he's doing his rotation, which is usually quite slow minimum speed compared with Perez, compared with Carlos Sainz. Quite low minimum speed, patient, rotate the car because he's got his advantage already going into the corner. And then he just straightens the car and just accelerates. in true Fangio tradition. And when people used to say to Fangio, wow, you just hit the same thing the size of a coin on the exit of the corner for 5 laps in a row. How do you do it? And he said, well, it's easy. I just drive the car to that point. It's not difficult. And the reality, of course, is that Fangio was also manipulating the car mid-corner and just driving it to the exit, which is what Max does. Makes it look absurdly simple, actually, when you're watching him, both in the car and from outside. But the art is in the way, the moment that he chooses to do that rotation, which is, for want of a better word, the moment of least possible downside. Because there's always a downside in a corner. It's the moment you got to turn the wheel, if you like. And Max has, and it's different every corner, every lap. Everything's changing. The tires, the brakes, the fuel level, the oil, the surface of the road, the ambient, everything's changing. Where you've hit the brakes, how you come out of the brakes, nothing is the same. And it's this feel for the exact precise moment to do it, which is not something he's thinking about. It's just pure instinct that makes him very special as an athlete, let alone as a racing driver.
Operating at a different level currently is Mr. Verstappen, and I'm here for it, Peter. Talk to us about Ollie Bearmann, so another name that you've mentioned, and another guy that you've been a fan of. How did his weekend go? Because again, the community's quite split on this. Some are saying, oh my gosh, he's the absolute next one, anoint him Fangio and Max Verstappen, it's only a matter of time. And some are saying that, well, let's take a chill pill here for a second. It was one race. We saw a similar circumstance with Nick de Vries last year, where he was brilliant in one but then couldn't combo 7 or 8 races, however many he was, and we ultimately saw that he wasn't fit for purpose. What's your take on Ollie Bearmann's performance this weekend, Pete?
Oh, I think he's in a different class than Nick de Vries. I think he's the real thing. He's really good, very good track craft, full of confidence. I think he's quite George Russell-ish in the way he drives at the moment, but I'm sure Jock will be softening a lot of those edges as the year progresses. And it's just a great shame, isn't it, that he's got no Ferrari drive to look forward to in 25, 26, because it's a lockout. So we're going to see him whatever Ferrari-powered car they'll put him into. I guess it'll be a Haas or something, which is okay, but it's a bit of a shame, really. No, I think he's really, really good. You say I'm a fan. I certainly became a fan in Formula 2 last year. I was a fan of Fred Vesti as well, still am a fan of Fred. And I think I know how good Fred is. And Oliver looked really good alongside him, I thought. So that was the benchmark. And from last year, I've always thought, wow, this guy is really good. But, what you're talking about here, some people saying, oh, well, let's not get too excited. It's all about all these hashtags, isn't it? Who is the best newcomer? You've got so many people going on about the great Kimi. You've got, in the background, nobody's talking about Liam Lawson right now. Liam Lawson is a very, very talented, very fast racing driver. Nobody's talking about him. Why? Because he's not there in the public eye. Nobody's featuring him at the moment. So that's where everybody needs to just calm down and settle down and not get too focused on one new star that's just happened to have been given this opportunity, as Oliver was in Saudi Arabia, and just keep a balanced view of what is going on around us. But there's no doubt Oliver Bearmann is really, really good. And that was pretty clear in the Barcelona test they did at the start of this year when he was out there, not back-to-backing with Charles, but not too far away, and not too far away on lap time either around Barcelona in a 22 car. So, this guy's good.
He's done incredibly well. His maiden voyage in F1. I think you're on the money there. He's Max said as much, that if he's in and around 6th position, ultimately ended up 7th, then he's done superbly well in that Ferrari.
He did really well. And as I say, a lot of that is, I think he set personal best on his last lap too, or penultimate lap. Yeah. It's not bad, is it? Yeah. So I don't have any doubt that if he was in that car for the rest of the year, he'd be really good. But equally, let's give it to Carlos Sainz, because I can't believe how good he was on Thursday with appendicitis. He was quick, especially on that longish run he did. He was really good. And then we know now he was suffering from appendicitis. So great that the operation went well. Great he was there on Sunday. Looking forward to seeing him in Melbourne.
Absolutely. Let's talk then about Lewis Hamilton, Peter. As customary with our chats, we've got to touch on the 7-time champ. And it feels to me as a Lewis Hamilton fan that we haven't necessarily seen him at his best. Of course, over the weekend, he was afflicted by poor strategy choice. I still don't know why they didn't double stack. And his race was affected negatively, their run-in. What do you make of Lewis and what feels like is a bubbling last year acrimony between Lewis, George and Toto?
Well, yeah, Lewis had a very disappointing weekend, I think. And he just didn't, super quick corners, rapid change of direction, nowhere to go if something goes wrong. He was definitely leaving margin and not comfortable with the feel of the Mercedes at all in terms of the back end high-speed oversteer, which is what you don't need in Abu Dhabi, in Saudi Arabia. So that's the next thing. Why were Mercedes so out of bed in terms of grip and balance in Saudi Arabia? Well, the answer is they were pretty quick in a straight line relative to McLaren. And that's a result of being quite slow in a straight line in Bahrain. So on the face of it, Mercedes went to Saudi Arabia running effectively less relative downforce within their own scope of the envelope. And the car was pretty skittish to drive. I mean, if it was skittish for George Russell, imagine what it would have been like for the old stager Lewis Hamilton. So again, it was just a poor weekend for him. And I think we're seeing a Lewis at the moment who's got his deal for next year. He's looking forward to his Ferrari career. He's getting paid a fortune. He's not going to try and go out on a limb now unless the car feels reasonably well balanced. And particularly on fast, meaningful corners, which are critical to the lap. And I think that's what we saw. It's not a great circuit, that Saudi Arabian track, drag strip, or whatever you want to call it, if the car's not feeling very good. And we saw there, Guan Yu Zhou just had the most simple of shunts, didn't he, in FP3. And so that was that. That was the first thing. I don't actually agree that was a bad call to leave him out. I think it was a good call because it was a good call for a number of reasons. One, he would have lost time in the stack. Two, given the way that weekend was going for Lewis, it was a good opportunity to give him some track position and give him some confidence. And that's exactly what happened. And I think if you look at it now, the medium to soft strategy, if everybody had run it, was the right strategy for that race. It was a quick tire over a long distance, that medium tire. And the hard tire was actually very difficult to use in its first phase. And there's Lewis on sort of 30 lap old mediums going quicker than George on relatively new hard tires. So actually, as it happened, it was a pretty good balance for Lewis. He got track position and he was able to do a little bit of racing, and he was on medium tires, which weren't too bad. It would have been worse if he'd been on hard, I think. So actually, I think Mercedes did a good job there, whether it was by design or just by luck, I don't know. But I think they did a pretty good job in that strategy they gave Lewis. And I don't think he would have had a better finish had he stacked behind George. I really don't. And I think he would have come out of that race thinking, well, I had some good track racing today, wheel-to-wheel stuff, and I quite enjoyed that. And I still enjoy my motor racing, even if I don't like that circuit, and even if the car was really difficult to drive, roll on Melbourne. And I think, end of the day, that's not a bad way for Lewis to be going into the Australian Grand Prix. The question is, of course, what balance to have on that car in terms of top speed versus the grip level they've got and the sweet spot they want to give the drivers. And they've got a bit of a problem at Mercedes because for sure George can operate within a much smaller sweet spot now than Lewis. And do you go in that direction, or do you go the Lewis direction, knowing that regardless the car's going to be half reasonable and George is going to get a lot out of it as ever, but he may not get any more out of it than Lewis. It's a difficult one, Again, if they hadn't replaced Valtteri, they wouldn't have this problem, but they do, and they did. I think it's worth talking about George as well, because George actually had a very uncharacteristic race, didn't he? He wasn't very good. He got blown away by an Aston Martin, if you like, if you please, which won't have pleased him at all. And I think a lot of that is the hard tyre wasn't very good. But also, it just shows how difficult that Mercedes was to drive. And that's very worrying news, I think, for Mercedes.
So what's gone on wrong with Mercedes, Peter? Because I know you made a video talking to, again, another GOAT F1 analyst in Scarbs. What's really fundamentally wrong with that W50? Because going into this season, they said they'd nailed it, they'd reconfigured the design philosophy. Now, apparently, they were barking at the right tree. They were seeing all the right noises and hearing all the right things out from the simulation, courtesy of Mick Schumacher. Yeah. And we are here again in the same place that we've been for the last 24 months as Mercedes.
Yeah, we have. And I think the answer is potentially look at McLaren. I think they've got a pretty similar car, same engine, that's for sure. And McLaren didn't fall into the trap of taking too much downforce out of the car for Saudi Arabia. And they gave Oscar and Lando a pretty drivable race car. It wasn't quick in a straight line, as we saw in the race, but it was a good race car that both drivers could hurl around and not make too many mistakes with and basically be confident with. And I think had Mercedes stayed in that area, maybe they would have had a better car in Saudi Arabia. I mean, who am I to say that? I'm just an observer. A technical department of Mercedes presumably have all the answers. Yeah, right. So that's my observation, that they lost some of their overall race performance because they were in search of too much top speed in Saudi Arabia. I think that was the problem. And they don't have enough aerodynamic efficiency to be able to do that, whereas Red Bull obviously can. And Ferrari was slower than Mercedes in a straight line as well, but they still had the grip and balance that enabled Charles and Oliver to do the job. So I think Mercedes just got the setup wrong there in Saudi Arabia. So we should reserve judgment completely on what is wrong with this car until after another couple of races. But I think Bahrain, they were not too bad. This race, they got the setup wrong. Let's see what happens in Melbourne.
I think what concerns me, Peter, is the fact that, not necessarily that they were slower, but the extent to which they were slower. Now, we saw Oscar and Lewis going back and forth, right, and even Lando too. And it seemed that Lewis was losing, I think Mercedes claimed that he was losing 7/10 through three corners in Abu Dhabi. And I think that's bonkers. That's really, really concerning. Even though that they were quick in Sector 2, through Sector 1 and Sector 3, that car, maybe balance, maybe just the fundamentals of its chassis design, was just losing hand over fist, as versus the works McLaren.
But that's downforce. That is downforce. What we're talking about is high-speed downforce, and that's Beckett's at Silverstone as well. I mean, that's where the McLaren was really good, because they had the aero grip they needed there, and Mercedes had taken that out of the car. Now, I'm not saying it's that easy to dial it in, but they were certainly quicker in a straight line. I mean, that's why they were quite quick on those sectors. But when it came down to that high-speed section, corners, McLaren were in a different class. And it was a very tight balance between top speed and how much grip to have, a little bit like the Monza balance. And McLaren, for race conditions, you would have said on paper, probably are too slow in a straight line. But it actually, in terms of the racing they had to do and the people they had to beat, forget Red Bull, they had a pretty good race car there. But as I say, it was pretty tight in terms of the overall balance between McLaren and Mercedes. And Aston, I think we're about sort of in between McLaren and Mercedes in terms of setup. A bit disappointing, given how ebullient Fernando was on Thursday, and equally all this stuff about, he's now in the qualifying mode presumably for the engine or whatever, and himself, and he didn't really go anywhere, did he? And that was disappointing. And as for Lance Stroll, I mean, what was that all about? If you're going to have a shunt in Saudi Arabia, at least make a massive mistake on a quick corner or something. Don't do it just hitting the apex of the slowest corner on the circuit. I mean, that's beyond belief, really, isn't it?
He's been watching those Max Verstappen on boards, Peter, and trying to replicate it, hasn't it?
I tell you what he was doing. I think he was trying to give it additional lock in the middle of the corner. You're right, to try and get the car a little bit straighter on exit, and he just, hit the guardrail on the left. I mean, it's all very well to give it additional lock, but the car's got to be in the right position on the track in which to give it additional lock mid-corner. And that if you're too close to the guardrail and you start banging the guardrail on the inside, what do you expect?
So what's the future then, Peter, for Lance Stroll? Is this classic Peter's principle that he's ascended to the heights that his competence sadly can't have him sit at? Has he outgrown his ability here, Lance Stroll? Not to be disparaging of the chap, because I think
I wish I could answer your question, Cam, because I mean, I was very disappointed with his comments after the race, just saying, "Oh well, I was trying pretty hard and I hit the guardrail. Looking forward to the next race," as if, "Oh well, it doesn't matter." I mean, that was a catastrophic mistake, and he just sort of, "Oh well, it doesn't really matter." And if that is his attitude, then we've got a glimpse to what's going on there, which is that basically he knows that he's got to keep racing because otherwise his father might pull the plug on all the money for Aston Martin. Because if Lance isn't racing, what's the motivation for Lawrence Stroll to be in there spending millions and, well, not of his own money necessarily, but putting that whole thing together for other drivers? It's no motivation for him at all to do that, I wouldn't have thought. He just want to try and sell the team, make his profit and disappear. So Lance is in this position, this invidious position, if you like. I mean, many young kids, millions of young kids around the world would love to be in his position, but he's in this position of knowing that he can't stop, even if he wanted to. So he's got to make the best of it. But he doesn't give the impression now of really being, I don't know, that confident that he can do it. Because that was a very poor explanation of the mistake he made. He should have been saying, "That was a big mistake. I'll never do that again. What a ridiculous thing. I lost concentration for a millisecond," or whatever it was. I mean, because you don't just, if you're trying hard and you're trying to pull away from the gap behind, you don't hit the guardrail on the apex of the corner. You, as I say, you do something in fourth or fifth gear, you hit a curb on exit or do something like that. You don't just run into a guardrail on apex.
Yeah. And he's been around a while now, has Lance? And I think
he has. Lando made that mistake, didn't he, last year in Q1? But he didn't have quite as big a result as the Stroll thing. He can do that there, but there's a lot of road. It's a wide bit of track there. There's no excuse.
It's a difficult circumstance to speak to this, then, Peter, because like what's the play here? Again, many people have speculated that Lance's dream was always to go and play tennis, right? And that could be where he goes from here on in. But like, how do you, as a team manager, Peter, how do you, like, what's the play if you've got Daddy Stroll that continues that clearly is interested in the success of Aston Martin as an F1 team, but you've got Lance who clearly isn't commensurate to reach those objectives? Do you get rid of son of that? Like,
as a team manager, you never ever allow the team to be supported by one person who could suddenly lose interest overnight or get run over by a bus or whatever. Red Bull were in that position for quite a long time with Dietrich Mateschitz, of course, but now the succession is there. But it's a very, very fragile thing to have a huge Formula One team with the budget that it has and the people it employs basically based on the whim of one person just wanting to do this. You try to spread all the risk as much as you possibly can, as quickly as possible, and get parts of the team sold off very quickly to other factions. And I don't think that's happened. I think, as far as I know, the shareholding is still basically the same there. And that's a worry because in his case, he's only doing it because he wants his son to be world champion. And I guess somewhere along the line, his son also believes that he can be world champion, certainly win Grand Prix. And that's a big problem, isn't it, for everybody working in that team, because they all know that if they're going to win a world championship, for a start, it'll be with Fernando Alonso right now. It won't be with Lance Stroll. And beyond that, if that's what's keeping him in the sport, it's going to be difficult.
And even speaking to the Fernando Alonso point, right, over the past race weekend, he's mentioned on more than one occasion his tune's turned from, I want to see, I'm in a privileged position being that I'm the only champion currently on the grid who hasn't got a contract for next year, to all of a sudden the R word. And he's saying, well, I need to have a conversation with myself and see whether I need to, I want to continue to make the sacrifice requisite to having success in F1. Peter, when you hear somebody talk about retirement, do you think that's them already having one foot out the door? Should you talk about retirement and then carry on in F1, or is that something that's indicative of mindset?
Well, when I heard Fernando saying that, I thought what he was thinking was, do I really want the World Championship so badly that I'll drive for Mercedes for 1 year and then be replaced by the great Kimi? And that's what I think he's thinking, because I would imagine he's thinking, I've got half a chance if I go to Mercedes and they got half reasonable car. I'll blow away George Russell and I could win some Grand Prix again, even if I don't win the championship. More chance of winning a race perhaps there than at Aston. But do I really want to sacrifice 3 more years at Aston just to go to Mercedes for 1 year. I think that's what he's thinking. I don't think he's thinking, well, I'm starting to think I ought to go and do something else. That was my reading of that, to be honest. And I'm sure that is possibly on the table for him. And I don't think he'll do it, because I think he'll be thinking, well, I've got a 3-year deal, whatever it is, long-term deal with Aston, and I can always be a badge ambassador for them going into the future, and who knows where it'll go. Lawrence is a good guy, whatever he's thinking, and I think that's what he's weighing up in his mind right now.
We'll see, Peter. It's all kicking off in the space that is F1, the weird and wacky world of.
Yeah, but I think the other thing is how Netflix have managed to get it so wrong in what they've been doing over the last couple of years, because quite clearly it should all have been focused on team principals and what goes on in the office at night and the fathers of the drivers running for the team. That should have been the Netflix show.
I think F1 need to make use of all this footage that we got. But the joke is, Peter, I know you say that half tongue in cheek, but that stuff, particularly at Red Bull, is going on. And we even see the Netflix producers filming the Christian Horner debacle going on before our eyes, right? Talk to me, what do you think? Here's where I'm concerned with the Christian Horner thing. There's breaking news that Ferrari are keen to bring on board Adrian Newey, as you've alluded to previously, that's the move. Can Red Bull, as they are today, March 2024, can they continue in this light with all of this acrimony, with Max speaking, only coming out and supporting Christian Horner in very kind of caveated terms? Or do you think that the Beatles of F1, being Newey, Horner and Max Verstappen, are destined to kind of break up and go their separate ways?
Well, I think, as I said before, I think Max is naturally more able to sort of massage the Austrian element of Red Bull, and Christian's more likely to be able to massage the Thai end of Red Bull, and between them keep Red Bull reasonably stable post Dietrich Mateschitz. I think everything else, the only thing that matters really, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of public intrigue and general public and the media love all that stuff that goes on, but I'm putting all that to one side under the heading of gossip. That's not particularly my scene. The only thing that matters is what Adrian Newey may or may not do as a result of all this. It's irrelevant really what happens to Christian, because there are other Christian Horners around. It's irrelevant what happens to Max to some extent, because if Red Bull keep Adrian, he'll stay there, and if he goes somewhere else, he'll go with Adrian, I'm sure. So it's all about Adrian and how Adrian reacts to all of this, and whether Adrian says, I've just had enough, this is the end of the whole thing. I mean, I've come this far in Formula One and now it all ends like this. I'm out of here. I'm going to go and design houses now. If that happens, that's a big thing. And equally, if Adrian says, I've had enough of Red Bull, I've had enough of this, I'm going to Ferrari, I should have taken the offer all those years ago. They're offering me 3 billion euros or whatever it is they're going to offer him. Lewis and Charles, not a bad driver lineup. I'm going to stay in England, design the car on my drawing board and send the drawings over to the Ferrari design office in Maranello. Great deal. Then that's a big thing as well. Or he may stay at Red Bull knowing that all this is going to blow over and it's not a real issue. So the only thing that anybody with racing blood in their veins should be thinking about is, how will this affect Adrian's future or not? That's the only thing that matters really, what happens with Adrian. And I said quite glibly, there are plenty of Christians around. I mean, I've always said that Christian's greatest quality is that he's managed to keep Adrian for as long as he has, and keep Adrian working at the level he's attained for as long as he has. And that's a brilliant thing that Christian has done. But in terms of running a company, team principal of a Formula One team, making it all happen, keeping the balls in the air, there are others around that do that very well. Christian's not the only one, and he'd be the first to admit that. But he does have that talent of keeping Adrian under control. And this will be the big test now, to see whether the Christian Horner-Adrian Newey partnership, which you could argue is the most successful partnership in the history of Grand Prix racing, let alone Formula One, going back to 1914, before that, 1908, is the most successful partnership in that history. Whether or not they can now get through this period as well, that'll be an interesting test.
And you've worked directly with Adrian before, haven't you? In your opinion, Adrian, from a distance at least, Adrian Newey is always smacked of the type of personality to be like, all of a sudden, listen, I've had enough of all this rancor and this intra-team conflict. He doesn't seem like the type of guy to put up with those sort of shenanigans.
No, I think he's very broad-minded, Adrian, and he's been through the mill himself. So I think he would say, I'm not interested. I don't care. None of this is important. The only thing that matters is, have I got the money and the team that enable me to do my job? I don't think it'll affect him at all. He'll only be concerned that Red Bull might be pulling out in a year or two, or maybe Christian. I mean, I imagine he's got very, very strong ties to Christian, and if Christian says, I'm out of here, I can't continue, I'm not going to be in Formula One anymore, or whatever he says, then, or he might say, I'm going to do a buyout. Do you want to join me, Adrian? And we'll do this new company. At that point, Adrian may say, I'm not sure I want to do that. I liked it as it was. Yeah. It was a guarantee money. I knew what I was doing. He's talking about setting up a new operation now, a bit of risk involved. And he's at this stage of his life, I'm not convinced Adrian would go for that. He might. I doubt it, to be honest. I think Adrian would like to keep the status quo and would like everyone just to enable him to get on and do his job. What they want to do behind closed doors is their business. I don't think that side of it worries him. He just needs the money, and he needs the clarity of position and future.
And that's exactly what Max is saying at the moment, right? That he wants it to be as it was, as far as the corporate structure of Red Bull GmbH and F1 Technologies, as it was when Dietrich was around. And again, there's all this talk of Christian Horner leveraging British financiers and potentially wanting to siphon off F1 Technologies, because the Thai family don't see the marketing upside necessarily from having it all under one umbrella.
I mean, to be honest with you, any financier that would look at that potential buyout, if they know what they're saying and what they're doing, would say to Christian, but we'll only do this if you guarantee we've got a 10-year contract with Adrian Newey. Otherwise, forget it. And that's a big thing for Christian to have to try to get. And I don't believe he would get that from Adrian. Again, I may be wrong, but as I say, I think that's a big ask. And yeah, he might get some people to back that. But if Christian himself doesn't have Adrian as part of the package, it's a difficult thing for him to do. Very difficult. Yeah, of course they'll want it to stay the same, but I think it doesn't really matter, even if there are politics involved at Red Bull's level, and even if there's a lot been going on behind the scenes from a personal scandal point of view. It doesn't matter in terms of the fan, because the only thing that matters, as I keep saying, is whether Adrian's there or not. That's the only thing.
He's the key person.
Peter. Well, he is the key person. Absolutely, yeah.
Jeez. Yeah. And the misdirection, again, I've been guilty of this. I'm concerned more where Max is going to go, but it sounds like from what you're saying, you believe an Alex Albon or a Carlos Sainz could easily slot into that RB20 seat and potentially win a championship.
Well, I don't say that. I think a Lewis could. I think a Charles could. I think you need Max plays a massive role in that, but I'm assuming that if Max wasn't there and Adrian was, it wouldn't be difficult for them to get any of those quick guys. I just can't imagine it would be difficult to get any of them. I think George Russell for sure, George Russell in an Adrian Newey Red Bull, yeah, he'd be quick. He'd win a lot of races, probably a championship, I suspect.
I don't disagree. Peter,
I'm not sure Carlos Sainz would, but I think a George would. I think an Oscar Piastri could, to be honest.
Yeah. You've been a big fan of Oscar. What did you make of the Oscar and Lewis interaction into turn one over the weekend? That they were playing off Lewis, obviously be super quick on the straights and showing Oscar the outside almost.
That's all you can do on that racetrack, isn't it? And I think that's a little bit part of these stupid rules we have where, and we saw it with Yuki Tsunoda and Kevin Magnussen as well, didn't it? It's like, you get past, but so long as you then edge the guy out coming out of the corner, the guy that's edged out, if he allows himself to be edged out, can then accuse of being run off the road. And I just don't think that's motor racing. I mean, if you've lost the corner going in the old days, I'm not going back that far, 15 years probably, you then gave up the corner. That was it, was gone. But these days, you lose the corner going in, somebody does a great pass on you, and all you got to do is then, make sure you look as if you've been squeezed out, and all of a sudden the other guy gets a penalty. That's wrong. It's wrong. I mean, what Oscar was doing, he was obviously trying super late under braking and realized then that he wasn't going to make it, went down the outside, escape road, gave the position back. It's a bit inelegant, isn't it? If that's how Formula One has to look these days. It's not an elegant look, I don't think. And Oscar did everything correctly, no problems there at all. And he knew eventually Lewis was going to stop, tires were going to go off. So it wasn't that big a deal. And the fact that he was up there doing that, blowing everybody else away, I don't think he got enough credit for that, really. I mean, look at the guys he beat, Fernando Alonso and George Russell. I mean, they're not exactly slow, slow racing drivers who don't have adrenaline in their veins. These guys are seriously good racing drivers, and Oscar just blew them away.
He's not a bad peddler, Peter. He's Oscar. He did
that because he's technically very, very good. And therefore, because he's technically very good with his driving, I'm not talking about technology, I'm about his driving, he can then actually think. He's got a bit more brain capacity to think about the rest of the race and what he's doing and how to improve things and maybe a bit of track craft in there. This is why I'm always a little bit confused by sports psychologists coming into Formula One, because they tend to, as my experience, they tend to sort of take any racing driver and start to try to change the way he thinks to give him more brain capacity to think beyond just driving the race car. But that can only happen if technically you're doing the job as well as it can be done in the race car. And I don't think any of the sports psychologists go into that realm at all. They just focus on the bit that they want to change. And with Oscar, it just happens naturally. He's got this incredibly talented, he's got this incredible way of driving, technical way of driving, I think, which is riding along the Max Verstappen lines, but not yet there, obviously. But that does give him that capacity to start thinking laterally in the race. And that's why he was good. That's why he was able to sustain that pace throughout the Grand Prix.
He's got a classic, great F1 drivers, they say, is that they've got a lot of CPU spare when they're driving the car at 10 temps. And I think Oscar.
Well, that's right. And I think what McLaren did was also an insight into the dynamic there as well, because I think they did exactly the right thing. Like Mercedes with Lewis, giving him a bit of confidence. They did the right thing to leave Lando out, because that gave him track position, left him on the medium. And guess what? The medium was a nice tire to be on for quite a long time. And it sort of separated him from Oscar's race, if you like. And so that was good. That was a good thing to do. But if they hadn't done that, guess who would have been the number one McLaren driver in that race?
And to that point, Peter, do you think Oscar could surprise Lando and Norris this year, as soon as this year, being that it's only his second year, and potentially beat him in the championship?
Well, I think we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
I suspect over a season, Lando will score more points, but I'm not sure that will be the yardstick that will be the definitive one. I think in terms of doing the job that Lando is doing as the long-term bet at McLaren, the number one driver, if you like, I think he'll feel his style is very cramped by this incredibly quick guy in the other car, as he would have felt last year. And Oscar will have good races. Lando will have good races, but Oscar will have surprisingly annoying qualifying results as well, I suspect. And Lando won't be that happy with that. It won't be the happy McLaren that he would love it to be if, say, Carlos was in the other car, I think, or Daniel was in the other car. As I've said all along.
Unsettling a little bit.
Well, yeah, he's that good. And I just think, to not trying to bash this old thing again, but if Oscar had stayed at Alpine, as would have been the simplest thing, and just accepted the drive they gave him alongside Esteban Ocon, and he was in that car now, and he was, by and large, beating Ocon pretty comprehensively every race, which I think he would have done. Guess who would be on a short list to go to Mercedes or, somewhere else now to sign a long-term contract?
The sliding doors of F1. Butterfly effect, Peter. Let me ask you, you've been super generous with your time, Peter, as we round third base. Let me ask you about the FIA, because, again, another hot topic, and the relative incompetence of the FIA as far as their ability to police F1. Here's what I'm talking about precisely. Mm-hmm. So the transponder, so Lando Norris's false start, that everybody watching F1 could see was a thing that happened, that he moved and then stopped and then moved again. that the transponder didn't go off, and apparently there's a loophole in the FIA regs as they stand that if they'd given him a penalty of 5 seconds, I think it is, that McLaren could have protested and had the penalty overturned. And that we see Lando doing the double move on the straights in front of Lewis, and again, no penalty there, just a cheeky black and white flag. Peter, are F1 going to have problems with the FIA in the case that they get another championship like 2021 that's super close, because they're still, it feels like they haven't made any sizable leaps as far as their ability to govern the sport in a way that's true and fair and consistent?
Well, it's a very good question, Cameron. It's a very long dissertation, I think. What I would say is that Abu Dhabi 21 remains unresolved. It was, by most standards, one of the biggest scandals in sporting history, let alone Formula One history. And in the end, it was a cop-out. Well, we'll fire this guy, we'll change this, and we'll try not to let it happen again. I mean, that is a complete and utter cop-out. And because of that, that whole thing has just continued. And I'm not speaking in terms of, I think Max should have won the championship or Lewis should have won the championship. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about actually the mistakes that were made at Abu Dhabi and the impact of those mistakes and how there was no proper resolution to that. And if you don't resolve something, it's like anything in life, whether it's a crime, whether it's some other incident, if you don't resolve, there isn't a closure, it just continues to bubble along and be an issue. And we're still, I think, in the undertow of everything that happened at Abu Dhabi 21 in terms of the way the FIA are administering the sport. And so I do think it is an issue. And I do think that, yes, it was a double whammy. We had Abu Dhabi and we also had lost Charlie Whiting. And there's two things there that have been very, very big in the way Formula One has run itself. So the first thing that needs to happen, I think Abu Dhabi 21 needs to be reopened, and there needs to be a proper closure which goes to a proper court where a proper legal decision is taken on whether or not there was a right result there. And I'm not saying we can reverse any of the results now. It's too late to do that. But I still think we need to go down that road of closure. And secondly, I think that you have to look at motorsport growing as it is in other parts of the world, and obviously under Liberty's watch in Formula One, becoming this huge business, show business, everything they want it to be. And if you look at IndyCar and if you look at NASCAR, they do administer their own business, their own sport. We've got this relationship, this tripartite relationship between the FIA, the teams, and Liberty. And in effect, the Liberty kind of own the teams, but in effect, the teams tell Liberty what to do. And there's the FIA in the middle. And it's an uncomfortable triumvirate. And I think things should change. I really do. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have the FIA, but I think there needs to be a bit of a showdown as to what is acceptable and what isn't. And the things you've talked about are just classic examples of things that have gone wrong in Formula One, not in the last race or the last year, but over the last 30 years, if you want to look at other things that have gone wrong, whether it be marshalling or this or that, stewards' decisions, and it wasn't good in the Max Mosley era, let's face it. I mean, I remember when there was a business in Brazil about, it was Williams and a couple of other teams, they were caught freezing their fuel, cooling their fuel to a temperature beyond which they shouldn't have been, below which. And it was quite clear that they'd done that. And in the end, it was another cop-out. It was, all the evidence from Williams was inadmissible, so we're not going to take that into account. Inadmissible evidence. There's a new phrase they came up with, inadmissible evidence, like a frangible helmet, when that all happened back in the Griffin days. And they come up with these phrases which just dismiss everything. And yeah, I feel quite strongly about this because, injustice, I think, is about the worst thing you can have in sport, in life, anywhere else. And you've got to be above all, you've got to be very fair. And I don't think that is the case, And I think going back to the Lando thing, the weaving thing, I mean, that to me was good race driving by Lando. I know I'm probably the only person in the world that thinks that, but I think it's ludicrous, that rule, and it's very unenforceable. And if a guy like Lando, who's a pretty clean racing driver overall, let's face it, is doing that, then it's time we revisited that rule, because yes, obviously there are things that are going to be dangerous and they should be jumped upon, but in general, that is part of racing. I think it's wrong that we have that rule to be stupid. I think it's very difficult to apply as well.
So the double move is, I suppose the weaving in the braking zone is always a difficult one to police. I think my issue with Lando.
But is it? Because it's a very badly worded rule.
Fair. No.
Some drivers, like Perez, love to do a little flare before they turn in. Other drivers, like Max, are already turning in and they're just lining up the rotation point. So how can you talk about you're not allowed to move the car under braking? What does that mean? It would be better to say anybody who has a transitory flare curve before a corner is going to get penalized. And then they wouldn't know what they're talking about, so it wouldn't happen. But you take my point. Every driver is different in the way they go into a corner under braking. So you cannot have a rule that is in any way affected by how they get into the corner. I just don't think it's applicable. Where's the apex? Max's apex is very different from Sergio Perez's apex, even though the graphics on screen would like to tell us there is an apex. It's not the case. And as I said before, every corner, every lap is different anyway, according to grip levels. So how can you have this arbitrary rule? I get quite worked up about that, because it just shows a complete not you at all, but the rule, people who've written the rules have no understanding at all about how race cars are driven. That's the problem.
I completely agree with that, Peter. And I've been saying for the longest time that the rules and regs are written, they read as if they've been written by a 5-year-old. I've dealt with contracts before when there are no terms and definitions that we can all speak to and say, okay, so that this is what the apex is, that's the midpoint of the corner. It's all very open to interpretation. And sadly, for race directors and marshals, it's a hiding to nothing, right? If the house that you're building is built on very sandy foundations, then as far as enforcing the rules in a way that's consistent across all drivers is always going to be a poison chalice of an exercise. It's impossible. Can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think, it's a bit going back to Lando's start now. Why do the teams have pit boards? Because the electronics aren't fail-safe. Something might go wrong. And if things go wrong on the grid with the sensors, use your eyes. It's not that difficult. Why haven't they got judges on every line?
Yeah, Charlie wouldn't stand for it, Peter.
Well,
Charlie wouldn't have stood
just
for
basic things, isn't it? You just make sure you got plan B. And you'd think after everything that happened at Abu Dhabi 21, they would have plan Bs lined up everywhere, left, right and centre. I'm a bit concerned by the number of good people that seem to be leaving the FIA as well, which would suggest that there's it's perhaps a difficult place to be right now. I don't know. But, when you got people like Steve Nielsen leaving, then you have to think, wow, there's a good guy that the FIA could have used really well, and he's leaving, and it's a great shame.
Yeah, similar story between the FIA and Alpine, apparently. And again, I remember, it's not lost on me, the interview that you did on the Peter D. Windsor YouTube channel with Otmar Schaffner, when he talked about all of that very extensively. Lastly, Peter, what is going on at Alpine, really? This is really, really bad, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, that should be a Netflix show in itself, I think. I don't know why they're not doing these. That's the real thing, isn't it? I have no idea. I'd love to know. I'd love to know what's going on in these, when they're having the croissants and the café au lait and talking about the future of Formula One and Viry Châtillon and everything else. Again, more people seem to have left. Good people have left, and they've got more committees there. So that doesn't look good from where I sit, but, who knows? You got to obviously give them the benefit of the doubt. Because I grew up in Formula One, knowing Colin Chapman very well, knowing Ken Tyrrell very well, and working for Patrick Head, I'm not a great guy for committees and subcommittees. I'm a great believer in just getting on with it. Not with most companies, but certainly with Formula One, where the only thing that matters is the next race. And getting on with it is the only way forward. And setting up more committees, to me, is bad news. More time spent, everybody's sitting behind laptops in a table rather than actually getting on building the car and making it better.
Oh, this is the modern day gig culture, Peter. This is.
Well, yeah, and then throw in 3-day weeks or work from home or whatever it is they have. Plus, of course, all the rules and regulations governing what they can do at the racetrack time-wise. It's all adds. Given all of that, given all the stuff you can and can't do at a racetrack, you would imagine they'd just work 24/7, wouldn't you, between races? But I keep hearing these horror stories from friends in teams that remain nameless, talking about guys who are on 2-day weeks, 2-day work at home out of 5, and they don't come to the factory at the weekend. And these are people that have, in other lives, have won Grand Prix, won World Championships, and they're now working for other teams, and they're finding that they go there at a weekend and the car park's empty. I can't believe it.
That sounds like that's very feasible in an F1 circumstance, or not?
Well, modern Formula One circumstance, I think, yeah.
Jeez, that's brilliant. Yeah. Peter, you've been super generous with your time. I always enjoy these chats.
It's a pleasure, Cameron, as ever. We've sort of skated over the surface of a number of quite discussion points, but I hope some of them made sense.
I love it. Always, Peter, your chats are super insightful, and I never leave these conversations not having learned something material about F1. It's a privilege. Peter, you guys can catch Peter D. Windsor, the Short Corners podcast, and the Peter D. Windsor YouTube channel. The podcast is on all good podcasting platforms: Google, Apple, Spotify.
Here's one, Cameron, that you didn't know. I don't know whether you can buy tickets for this or not. I've no idea, but I got a phone call from Nigel Mansell the other day asking if I would compare an event with him, basically chat with him on stage at Williams on May 22. Oh. So, of course, I said, yeah, that would be fun. So, and I think it's for his charity, Youth UK, as well. So if anybody's listening and they might want to go to that, I'm not quite sure how you get the tickets for it. Don't ask me any more questions. I'm just going to turn up on the night. But it could be something. Could be quite a lot of fun. I think it's at the Williams Museum Heritage Centre, I think.
Oh, Nigel and Peter on a stage. You're having a laugh, aren't you? That's going to be a bit.
I'm a bit concerned because it'll be Nigel. Remember when you said this to Colin Chapman, and you said, "No, I never said that to Colin Chapman." Yes, you did, Nigel. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. I can imagine it being that. But anyway,
mate, that's
Nigel. Come on, that never happened. Come on, Peter. You know that happened. It'll be a bit like that. I think it'd be quite fun, really. You're gonna
have to send me a link, Peter, for that so that people can start copying tickets, because that sounds like that's.
I say I've no idea actually how I presume Williams know about it, but if not, Youth UK. I might even have let the cat out of the bag before it's all. I don't know, but I'm just. There you go. What can I do?
I love it. Go and follow and subscribe to Peter D. Windsor YouTube channel. Again, no underestimation or understatement. The go-toest F1 content in the space by miles. Purple sectors, as always.
Thank you very much, mate.
If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, as always, drop a follow and 5-star review. Por favor. Between now and next time, as always, remember to look but never stare.